I think we will start there. So welcome everyone to today's webinar, coming back to theatre and prioritising the audience experience. We will be recording today's webinar, so if you do have to duck out early, then it's not a problem, as we will be making the video and the slides available after the webinar. So just to bear in mind, if you do have any Q&A at the end, any questions, if you don't want to be seen, please make sure you turn your camera off. Okay, right. Well, I think we're joined by a lovely mix of people from around arts organisations throughout the UK, which is fantastic. I'm Helen Jones. I'm the Digital Marketing Manager at Point One EPOS. Some of our clients are joining us today. They will be aware of Point One, but for those who aren't, we are a hospitality EPOS supplier, and we specialise in theatre-focused solutions such as interval ordering, ticketing integration and customer-facing kiosks. Just a little bit of background about how this survey that we're discussing today came about. I first became aware of Indigo and their work through the fantastic national surveys they were running throughout lockdown all of last year, and obviously they're continuing now. They were tracking cultural audience sentiment. So I approached Katy about partnering on a new piece of audience survey research, looking at theatregoers' expectations post-lockdown into what they felt would make a great theatre experience, and also how important the food and drink offer would be as a contributing factor. So ultimately, can theatres still provide a great experience while social distancing safety measures will still be continuing? So before I pass over to Katy to take you through her survey findings, just a quick bit of housekeeping. As I said, we will be having a Q&A at the end for those of you who want to stay on for that. If you do have any questions, then please just pop them in the chat and hopefully we can field these at the end. Okay, so without further ado, let me pass you over to Katy and her team at Indigo to talk about the survey findings.
Hello everyone, good morning, hope you're all okay. You can hear me okay? Great. So I'm just going to introduce Indigo. We are a consultancy, and before COVID we were a consultancy that specialised in marketing and fundraising strategy for cultural organisations. But since COVID hit last March, we've been spending most of our time trying to find out what audiences are thinking and feeling about returning to venues and about digital culture, and how we can help the sector to open safely. So what we're going to cover today in today's webinar is just quickly explaining some of the research that we've been doing with audiences over the last year, our understanding of where we're at now and what we think audiences need right now. I imagine a lot of you, if not all of you, are now planning for reopening. Hurrah! So we hope that today's session is going to give you a lot of what you need to be able to do that. Then Flo's going to take us through the findings of the Coming Back to Theatre survey, and we're going to look at what we think the main opportunities are for venues, with, as Helen said, some time for questions at the end. So, okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar with the work that Indigo's been doing, we launched very quickly an audience sentiment survey back in April last year, called After the Interval, and the idea was to get a very quick snapshot at that point of what audiences were thinking and feeling about missing cultural experiences, about their thoughts on coming back, and then we moved on very quickly. After that, we realised that the two big opportunities over the summer were basically to use outdoor work. There was a lot of interest in outdoor work, and also digital. So Act 2 was the sort of follow-on to After the Interval, and looked in particular at those two areas. In September, we launched the Culture Restart Toolkit, which has been tracking audience sentiment since then, and carries on and will carry on until we're all well back established in our venues. The toolkit involves not only an audience tracker for audiences who haven't been able to come, but also pre and post experience surveys for the venues that did reopen, so that we can see what customer confidence levels were like when people actually came back. And we've also got a digital experience survey for those of you doing digital work as well. So through all of that, we've got hundreds of thousands of responses from pretty engaged previously cultural attenders, nearly 700 organisations involved. So we've got a pretty good picture of what audiences are thinking and feeling. As well as that, we've been doing a lot of audience panels on Zoom for various organisations. So we've actually talked directly to customers as well. So I just want to give you my very sort of, at this moment, thinking about reopening, there's obviously a lot of need for audience reassurance. We'll show you some figures in a bit. But whilst there's a lot of excitement about reopening, there's an awful lot of hesitation as well. And we think that audiences need 5 types of reassurances from you to really feel safe and comfortable coming back. So obviously, the first one is around health and safety. And I imagine you've all got this well covered with, you know, whether you're making people wear masks for the whole time, hand sanitizer, queuing, you know, all of that stuff that we're used to seeing now everywhere we go. I imagine that you've got all of that well sorted. If you want a checklist to make sure that you've got it sorted, UK Theatre has a really good toolkit called See It Safely. So if any of you haven't had a look at that, it's a really good way of making sure you've got everything in place. So the first thing they need to know is, will they be safe? Will they feel safe? And secondly, access reassurances. So not only for people with access requirements to do with disability, but also, you know, I live in Birmingham, and Birmingham city centre has changed beyond recognition over the last year. So if the road systems are different, or the public transport systems or services are restricted, people might need to be, even though they were very au fait with what they were before, you might need to just remind them about those things or what the access provision is. And then obviously the key access requirements that you have in place for people who need them. So one of the things that we've been very concerned about, and certainly the work that we've done looking at disabled audiences, we've worked with a couple of disability consultants to look at the data we have on that. And it's very clear that people with disabilities are worried that their needs won't be prioritised when they're returning to theatres. So if you've got queuing systems in place, will they be given priority? Will socially distanced seating still allow for people in wheelchairs to have wheelchair spaces, etc.? So they're going to need some reassurances around that. The third type of reassurance that we think they need, and that has come out of the research, is financial reassurance. So they need to know whether, if they can't come because they have to self-isolate or they're ill, or whether if you cancel the performance, will they get their money back? Or can they have a credit note, or can they exchange that? So being really upfront about what you're able and willing to do to give them that financial reassurance. The fourth one, particularly of interest to younger audiences, is social reassurances. Am I still going to be able to have a good time? Am I still going to be able to go and enjoy this experience with the people that I'm going with? And will it still feel like a theatre experience? And that's one of the things that we started talking to Helen about early on in our conversations about, you know, what part does the food and beverage offer play in people going to the theatre, and how important is that? And if it wasn't there or was restricted, would that make a difference to whether they would reattend or not? So, you know, all those things you may have in place in terms of bubbled seating, so that it was very clear early on that people wanted to sit with the people that they were going with, but they wanted space around them. What will you do in terms of, if you're opening the bar, will you make people book a table to have their drinks? We'll talk about all of that in a minute, but all of those things really important. And then finally, what we're calling brand reassurances. On our Zoom panels with audiences, we had a lot of people expressing concern that these lovely arts organisations that they've felt like home and that they've really wanted to go to are going to feel too sanitised, and they're not going to still feel like the same warm and welcoming place that they went to before. So things like some of the venues that reopened last year had things like their staff wearing badges saying welcome or talk to me, because obviously all the staff will have masks on and might look a bit unapproachable. Having people at the door welcoming people. We know from the research that we've done that the point of arrival is the point of maximum anxiety for people. Once they get past that, if they feel safe and welcome as they arrive, you can almost see their shoulders drop as they walk in. So having the right people and things at that point, signage, but also people to welcome them, is really important. So I'm going to pass over to Flo to talk us through the findings of this particular piece of work, which, as I say, we talked to Helen about because we were really interested to find out about how that food and beverage offer could be part of these reassurances and part of the theatre going experience. So Flo will take us through the findings.
Hi everyone. So yeah, as Katie said, I'm going to give you a bit of a quick overview of the survey findings. So it was commissioned by Point One and developed by Indigo, as we've explained. We used some questions which were similar to ones in our Culture Restart toolkit, which would mean that we were able to kind of compare across the national data set, but we also added in more of a focus on the audience experience in the venue. The survey ran for just over 3 weeks, from the 16th of March to the 7th of April. To give you a bit of a reminder of the context, because time seems to be a strange concept at the moment. So that was the point of the government roadmap where social restrictions were just kind of starting to lift in the first stage on the 29th of March. So during that period, we were starting to think a little bit more about being social in gardens and on walks. We had 8 cultural organisations take part, and we gathered 4,000 responses from cultural audiences. The respondents' demographic was very similar to our other surveys. It was skewed to the typically slightly older cultural attenders, with slightly under a third in the under 55 age group, a third within the 55 to 64 age bracket, and just over a third who were 65 or older. And we had 11% of our respondents identified as deaf or disabled or had a long-term health condition. And all of that is fairly standard to what we've seen in the national findings so far. Clearly, because we were looking at a mainly older demographic, the majority of respondents had received at least 1 vaccine dose at the point when they completed the survey. And when asked how COVID had affected their finances, around 1 in 5 said their income had been reduced as a result of COVID. So the first questions that we asked them were whether they had attended anything in person since July 2020. So thinking about that period between lockdowns when many organisations were able to stage some work. We found that 77% of our respondents hadn't been able to go to anything, which was pretty consistent with our findings from other surveys. So thinking about just that group, we asked them the reason why they hadn't been back. And the main reasons that they gave were that they were trying to avoid crowds of people, with the next highest reasons being that there hadn't been enough opportunity to attend, or that they didn't think the experience would be enjoyable. So that's quite interesting, coming on to some of the bits that we're going to be thinking about next, about the experience of returning to the theatre with some COVID restrictions in place. For those who did return, generally they felt very safe and confident when they visited. So what you're looking at here is a confidence score rating on a scale of -5 to +5, showing a really healthy 3.6. So in our other research, we've seen just how important the act of attending is for building confidence, and what a brilliant job venues are doing to make people feel safe when they are able to return. We also asked whether there were any food and beverage options on offer, and generally we saw that there were some, but there were a limited range. This small group of people who did return in that period were pretty happy with that offering, because I think they were the kind of desperate to get back kind of people. But what about everyone else? So we asked audiences how they were currently feeling about returning to live events. We found that a quarter were desperate to return, so that first chunk of people would return as soon as it's permissible. We then have half of respondents who said they're looking forward to it, but they need a bit of reassurance about social distancing and the safety measures that are going to be in place. We then have a further nearly a quarter who said they might need to just wait a little while and see how things go. So what we're taking from this is that we have a few who are going to need a little bit more time. We have a few who are going to rush back as soon as they can. And then we have that big group of kind of potential attenders in the middle, that 50%. They're going to need a little bit more persuasion and reassurance. And we need to make sure that their first experience back is the one that means they want to keep coming back and come again. This was very much reflected in when they said they would start booking again. That small group again that you can see saying they're not going to be booking for more than 6 months, which is very much aligned with those ones who earlier said, I want to see how things go. And then a spread of others kind of picking points within the next 6 months, and a nice portion picking within the next month. So we then asked our survey respondents what makes the ideal trip for them, with a range of options relating to kind of other things about the visit rather than just the show itself. We had things including, you know, have a drink in the interval, all the way down to buying sweets or snacks to take into the auditorium, going somewhere nearby for a drink. And the top 3 options which ranked, so we asked them to rank it on a scale from not at all important to essential. And those top 3 that came out highest were all part of the in-venue offer. So a drink or ice cream at the interval, or a drink before the show. So what this suggested to us was that venues who are able to offer a COVID-safe drinks and ice creams offer was they could really benefit from that secondary spend to compensate for some of the lower capacities and ticket income that we may be suffering. So we just need to think about how we're going to do that in a COVID-safe way, and that's what we're going to come to afterwards. We then asked how audiences felt about certain safety measures or restrictions being in place at the venue. So the responses to this question show that the least attractive options for audiences were performances which don't have an interval, or those that have no catering on offer. So they're pretty happy with things like needing to wear face masks, you know, they're okay with that. One-way systems to manage the flow of people, that's all fine. But it's those 2 options at the bottom. And we saw on the previous slide that having a drink before the show or during the interval is a really important aspect of the experience. So for many people, if that wasn't available, reattending would be considerably less attractive for them. And then finally, we wanted to ask audiences how they would feel about changing the way in which they ordered food and drinks at the venue, and what would be kind of the most attractive options to them. So we gave them a range of different options, from a priority bar service to using various different technologies to make that all a little bit easier. The results were really interesting, with the priority bar service coming out as the most attractive option, and the selection of different technology uses, including smartphone technology and pre-booking along the purchase path, were also popular among a big range of different respondents. So I'm now going to hand over to Katy to talk through a little bit more about some of those and think about how they fit into our audience reassurances.
Thanks, Flo. So we think that, you know, thinking particularly around that social reassurance that I talked about earlier, we think there are 3 opportunities here that are worth considering. You may want to do some of them or all of them. The first one is about utilising the purchase path, so encouraging people to book their food and beverage choices when they're booking their tickets. So that was clearly something that they were interested in, so we'll have a look at that. The second opportunity could be using an app for people who are perhaps less organised and just leave it until they get to the venue, but let them book off their smartphone in the venue. And then the third opportunity, we think, is if you were able to do either of the first 2, you would then be freeing up staff to be able to offer an enhanced priority service in the venue to people who weren't able to use smartphones or technology. So we're going to talk about each of those in turn. So first of all, utilising the purchase path. So the idea of booking drinks or ice creams or whatever as they book their tickets. This was most attractive to those aged 35 to 55, and over half of that age group either said it sounds good or they would love it. For some people who are organised, a bit like my dad, they want to have everything sorted before they come and paid for, and know that they've not got to handle cash at the venue and all of that stuff. It's all sorted and they can just arrive and relax. And obviously it's an opportunity for the venues to use this to upsell or encourage higher spend at the venue. So it's the kind of what I call the Disney principle, where they try and get you to buy lots of things when you're booking, and then you've already spent that money in your head, so you can then spend more money afterwards. So there's an opportunity there perhaps to get even more money out of them later. So one organisation doing this very well is Selladoor Venues, and we spoke to their ticketing operations manager, Samuel Biscoe, to hear more about this. He told us that pre-COVID, they'd used their Spectrix system to allow customers to pre-order ice creams and bar vouchers using the booking path, as well as other options like pre-show dining, special treat bags and production special offers. When they were able to reopen during COVID, he said they'd found it very useful to be able to manage the flow of people, because everyone had specified arrival times, and because the show didn't have an interval, they were able to prepare all the refreshment pre-orders to be put out at the specified arrival time. He said that they'll definitely continue to use this in the future. And we asked Sam if he had any advice for organisations who are doing this for the first time. So we're just going to play you a short clip of the interview that we did with Sam for his top tips.
Yeah, so if you've never upsold a voucher or whatever it is online before, my advice would be that ice cream vouchers work really well, because people will, the people that really want to have their ice cream, they will see the value in buying that voucher beforehand. So they already know that they've got their ice cream and it's there. They're less, and then if you've got somebody that's perhaps a first timer and they kind of think, oh yeah, I quite like the idea of having an ice cream, if they decide not to add that into their basket at that time, and then they're in the interval and it's really busy at Christmas and Panto's happening, that they may be put off by there being a number of queues or having to go and walk around. But if they've already sort of prepaid for their voucher, they're going to feel a bit more empowered to go and use it. So those standard expectations for a theatre visit are quick wins. I'd encourage everybody to think about what's the added value of the upsell, whatever that may be, to that particular performance. You know, you may find that you've got something that is like more appropriate for some performances than others. So if you've got a perhaps Here Come the Boys, for instance, the Strictly dance show that's coming, you may find that there is a certain female demographic that may be coming to that performance, and you may be able to upsell a different type of package to that particular audience over doing something else. So one size doesn't necessarily fit all, but also there is a weight between, do you put on something that makes it a bit more experiential for that person, and particularly if you know that a show that you programmed is going to bring in a lot of perhaps first timers. We know that first timers are more difficult to retain, but they may also be willing to spend a bit more money on that particular thing if they feel like they're going to be their theatre experience for the year. Those people may be an easier target for a higher value upsell, whereas if you've got something that you feel is going to be particularly repetitive, I suppose, like a Panto audience, those people have come, they know what to expect, they know what they want, they're going to be a bit sort of more focused on just finding the tickets, booking it for mum, dad, grandma, the 6 children and all of those people, and getting the best value.
Brilliant, thank you, Sam. So Sam's top tips then. Firstly, think about your quick wins, so ice creams, things like that, and things that are going to be easy if somebody just has a voucher to just hand that over and grab the ice cream. Consider first-time bookers who, maybe don't come that often, but will potentially spend more on that visit and splash out. And thirdly, targeted upsells based on the performance and what you know about the audience that's likely to attend that performance. So, second opportunity, we think, is to look at using a mobile app on a smartphone for ordering drinks in So if you haven't been all book, you get to, but there's the ability to do it there. And the two options that were both among our survey respondents are ordering on the app and collecting from a designated collection point, or ordering on the app and having it delivered to your seat. And that was the version, that was the option that got the highest percentage of people saying they would absolutely love it. I would particularly love that. So we're going to ask Paul from point one now to explain to us how this actually works.
Hi there, I'm Paul Berryman. I'm the Sales and Partnership Manager for Point One. I also look after the vast majority of our theatre customers. And today we're going to be looking at our order and pay solution. So we developed our order and pay solution to help our theatre and venue customers increase the secondary spend within the venue. And it's all about interacting with that customer as much as possible. So once the customer is sat down at the seat, they can actually use their smartphone to scan a QR code, which will take them to our online ordering API. This API is then linked to the bars or indeed the kitchen. The customer can then order and pay, and they would pay using a secure payment gateway, which we would normally find would be the guys that would look after the PDQ machines at site level. That payment would then be taken, and that would then fire directly through to the bars. And we do actually have some theatre customers who are going to start using KDS screens or order process screens instead of the traditional printers, which then can make things even slightly more interactive. From that, the item can then be delivered to the customer within their seat. Some of our customers are even going to actually have collection points within the auditorium, because this will stop the actual staff maybe having to reach over to that person in the middle seat. So that's just worth considering as well, that how will you deliver the drinks in a post-COVID world. The mobile app itself can be fully customizable, and it can have things like images of individual products or even just the categories themselves, and it then can have logos. We'd normally recommend that this should then follow the branding for the whole operation itself. What a lot of our theatres are actually also considering is within the venue using what's called a mobile POS unit. So mobile POS is basically a portable till, and you'll see this on normally a Windows tablet. And what this can then do is that ushers who are delivering drinks could actually become a till point as well. So you'll find customers who might not want to order on their mobile phone, or maybe customers like my grandparents who might not necessarily have a mobile phone can order using one of these smart tablets, and basically the ushers would just be going around the auditorium delivering drinks, but also then becoming a till point as well and asking anyone, would you like to place an order? This would then work in exactly the same way, that the items would then be fired through to the nearest bar. The bar staff would then make it, and then you would have an usher delivering the drinks. So these are a really good option as well to help increase that secondary spend. You will also see other mobile technology beginning to come into theatres. We are integrated with two companies, one called Visit and one called CrowdEngage, both quite similar in what they offer, but that's then taking mobile phone technology a step further, where it's not just about ordering and paying, but it's also about then linking that to the booking platform, so to Spectrix or Tessitura. This then allows your customer to have a complete closed journey via either Tessitura or Spectrix. That what would happen is that the customer would order their tickets and then be taken to an online ordering API where they can either have interval order drinks or pre-order drinks and all kinds of things, which are quite interesting. We're even going a step further with Visit, where the customer would actually have their ticket scanned on arrival, and if they've ordered any pre-ordered drinks, that will then fire directly through to the till and say that that customer has arrived at the theatre, so the bar staff can then start actually creating the drinks themselves. So it's a really interesting journey out there, and I can only see the technology improving, and the ways in which we can increase secondary spend is only going to increase. I hope you found this interesting. If there's any more information you would like, or if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And Paul's on the call today, as is Samuel. So if you've got questions for either of them, please do put them in the chat and we can find them later on. So obviously there's loads of options there and possibilities. I'm really interested in, you know, would you want a collection point? Would you have multiple collection points? How would you handle that so it didn't get confusing? The whole at-seat service I'm now obsessed by. I think this is brilliant. I wonder in some venues whether it's something that you would only be able to offer it perhaps in certain seats so that you were confident your staff could get to people in those seats. And then, of course, with my marketing hat on, I kind of go, oh, does that mean that actually you could charge extra for sitting in those seats and have premium seats where you can have an at-seat drink service and potentially mark those seats up? So my little brain was whirring all over the place with some of those things from Paul. So we're now going to hear from Mike Dwyer from Birmingham Hippodrome, who've actually been using this technology recently to see how it's going with them. So over to Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Dwyer. I am Head of IT at Birmingham Hippodrome Theatre.
Thanks, Mike. So Point One installed our interval ordering app in summer of last year at the Birmingham Hippodrome. Can you tell us what prompted you to implement this?
Yeah, unfortunately with the pandemic, our theatre had to close down, like many operations, but we redesigned our offer. We changed the theatre space into an exhibition hall, and it allowed us to bring the audience back into the theatre in a staggered, controlled amount to see this exhibition. And we needed to do some food and beverage offer within that. And we needed an app, and we needed to try and restrict the amount of staff to customer interaction. And the app ticked many boxes for us.
Great. So how did you find the actual install process? And secondly, how were your customers using the product?
Well, when it was implemented, we were one of the first ones to start using it. I think it was still new technology for Point One. And what I was impressed about, and my colleagues were, the speed with which we were able to integrate it. We already had our Point One TPOS system, but actual getting the app working, up and running, tailoring it, putting our own logo on it and everything. Over we had a very tight time scale to get this in, Helen, and between us and Point One, we achieved possibly the impossible to get it in, and it proved very, very successful. The customer comes into the restaurant area, they don't really interact with the staff at that point. They use their phone, there's a QR code on the table, they scan the QR code, that brings up the menu with the offer on it, they order whatever food, drink they want, they then pay for whatever they want to order at that point. From the point they pay, that's when the order goes through to our kitchen area where the order is prepared. The only point where the staff member or operator gets involved is when they bring the order to the customer.
Sure. So it's really limiting on that, like you say, that interaction. And on the back of that, then what do you think were the kind of benefits you experienced from using the app?
There have been several benefits, and that's one reason we wanted to implement the app. One of the key things was COVID safety. The app provides less staff to customer interaction. As I think I've explained, the customer and staff only really interact from the point when their order is brought to them. The customer sits at the table, stand alone, makes the order themselves. The one thing we've also found is the customer they've adapted to the app very, very quickly. They found it easy to use. That's a big, big win. Less cash. There's no cash with this transaction. They have to pay for their order at that point using their credit or debit card. There's no cash between them and our member of staff happening. With that, there's less problems. You get better accuracy with it. The customer gets an email receipt sent to their email address showing them what they've ordered. They've got reference for that going forward. It's time saving for the staff as well. They're able, because they're not interacting with the customer all the time, they're able to do other duties, they're able to prepare the food, provide better customer service in other areas of the theatre. It allowed better customer control as well. We found that we were able to stagger the amount of customers who were coming into our restaurant area. There have been many, many benefits with the app, but the key one I would suggest is the fact that the customer and staff have less interaction, and also the way that the customers are able to use it as quickly as they have been able to. They've adapted to it. This idea of not using cash anymore, using their credit cards. 2 big wins there, Helen.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that, Mike.
No problem.
Brilliant. So it's great to hear from Mike that that customers were adapting to that really quickly, and also that it was freeing up staff to be able to offer better customer service to other customers. And so I suppose this third opportunity we think is perhaps to make sure that happens. And obviously we all want to use technology, and we've all got used to using technology during COVID, and that's fine for those of us who are confident and happy and able to use that. But I think we'd all agree that we need an inclusive welcome when venues reopen. And so how could we use the opportunity to make sure that those who don't have access to those are still able to get the amazing service that they want when they come to the theatre? So it's really interesting in the survey that the idea of a kind of priority bar service for perhaps elderly and disabled patrons, or anyone that's unable to use or doesn't have a smartphone, was something that was really appealing to everyone. And of course, the cynic in me when I saw this was, oh, well, that'll just be all the old and disabled people who want that then, won't it? But no, when we actually broke it down by age, you can see on the graph that the people who liked this idea most were the younger people. The 15 to 19-year-olds said, this sounds good. The pink bar is the, yes, this sounds good. And the dark blue bar is, yes, I would love this. So this gives me great faith in human nature, that actually the people that are most confident and au fait with technology are also really happy and love the idea of offering a preferential service to the people that can't use the technology. And I think there's a win-win opportunity here. So the things I think you would need to think about here would be very clear advanced messaging. So obviously you would be trying to nudge the customers that can use technology towards that, so that you're able to offer the priority service to the other people. So it would need lots of advanced messaging, obviously completely thinking very carefully about the signage at the venues, so that it was very clear what you were wanting people to do. So if they managed to get into the priority bar queue, that there's still plenty of messaging there saying, if you can use the app, please use it. Here's the QR code. And obviously lots and lots of staff training. And I suppose the thing that I would be most concerned about is that whenever anybody does get into that queue, that they're made to feel welcome and that they're not quizzed about why they're in it. And I know none of you would do that, but that idea that, you know, if I've put myself in this queue, it's because I need to be here and I'm not able to use the technology. So it's how you incentivize and nudge and encourage everyone else to use the technology so that you really can offer this service. So before we jump into the Q&A, I'm just going to sum up and say, you know, please think about all of these reassurances that customers are going to need. And I think they're going to need these reassurances for quite a long time. You know, we will all get very comfortable with going back into venues, but we know that there's considerable amounts of people who are going to wait a while. So as much as we're all focused on this now, we also need to be giving these reassurances in 6 or possibly 12 months' time as well, and to be thinking of these reassurances as wider than just the health and safety things. And I think some of the things that perhaps we've talked about today might help people to not only feel safe, but to have an amazing experience when they come back to the theatre. So we're going to jump into the Q&A. It's also worth saying that the report will be available to download. We've written a report that goes alongside this, and Point One will send you a link to that tomorrow. The slides from today and the recording of today will also be available, and they'll send that out. We've got Sam on the call, Paul on the call now, myself and Flo and Helen, all available to take questions. If you've got any questions that you don't feel able to ask now, but you would like to ask later, please email any of us. And Mike from the Hippodrome is also happy to take questions from anybody by email. If you would like that, we can put you in touch with them. So, Flo, do we have any questions?
We do. We have one from R. Ward. I wondered if you'd like to ask that question yourself.
Hello, it's Rachel.
Hello, Rachel.
Yeah, so the last time we were able to open, we actually did the online ordering, and we did the at your seat service, which was great. And we are actually having the 0.1 system installed before we reopen again. So it'll be even better when we do reopen. But in the last guidance, if you were in a pub or a restaurant, you weren't allowed to go up to the bar. You had to have it delivered to you. But in theatres, they made an exception so that you could open your bars and you could go up and customers could collect the drinks or order from the bar. However, I'm struggling to find anything within this guidance that says we're allowed to do that. And it seems like they've gone backwards and said, actually, no, it all has to be at your seat again. I just wondered if anyone else has read anything different or knows anything.
Has anybody got any insight on that? Put your hand up or just shout if you have.
It's all quite confusing, isn't it? I was just a bit concerned because we were going to change the way we worked to have a collection point, but I wonder if we're allowed to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one that's worth us checking out or asking point one to check out. I imagine that the UK theatre people will know about that. So I think unless anybody else has got insight, we'll take that one offline and follow up on that, I think.
The only thing, sorry, hello.
Hello.
The only thing that I'd seen is the reference to sort of like cinemas. You were allowed to queue and buy refreshments because you were then taking them straight to your seat. So I don't know if there's something in that, being a collection point and taking straight to your seat. What we're currently trying to look into is the table service aspect, and then equally does that then impact on our hospitality, having to collect customer data a second time because then they're classed as hospital. It's quite a lot of information, but I was sort of under the impression that the collection points would be okay.
Yeah, and certainly in terms of capturing their data, you've got to capture the data of everybody who's coming into the building anyway.
Yeah, there was just a second part under the hospitality section that says they can refuse entry if they don't give it, whereas theatres don't have to. But at what point, if they're just sort of sat at a table getting seat service and taking that drink straight into the theatre, at what point does it become hospitality and they then have to collect that information again?
Well, no, if you've collected it once, you don't have to collect it again because it's just the track and trace. So if you've collected it once, you don't need to collect it again because you've got it.
Yeah, well, it didn't kind of read like that because there was a section about if you're a cafe within a museum, you need to collect that information again.
Right, but I think that's if it's a different operator within the museum. That's how I read it.
Ours is.
Oh, is it? Oh gosh, okay.
So I didn't interpret it that way. I interpreted it as regardless, but obviously for us that's something that we need to look into anyway.
Oh, what a pain. And then you sort of think, where's the customer in the middle of all of that? It's just going to put so many barriers in the way, isn't it?
It seems silly to ask them to scan an app and then 10 meters further down at a table have to take the details in some other.
Yeah, it does. It does.
We're figuring that out too.
Oh God, nothing straightforward.
No.
Any other questions from anyone while we have you here? We're sort of on the time that we said we'd come to an end, but I think there's a couple of minutes if anyone has a final question. And if not, I will hand over to Helen to draw it to a close.
Okay, all right, great. Well, thank you so much everyone for attending today. I hope people found it, the research and the insight that Indigo and the guys have put together for us useful. And lastly, just to say, for any of those that are reopening from the 17th of May, best of luck. Okay, well, take care and thanks for attending.